refreshing and uplifting and encouraging, and it makes you feel,
There's one where Joshua says to it's enough to know, as if he's saying, whenever
A monk asked Joshi, does a dog have a Buddha nature or not?
And Zen masters answer things in a very clever, almost ambiguous sense.
I do think it would be a disservice to both the literature and the
I think similar in the sense that not necessarily talking about the rabbit, but talking about the reaction of his mind to seeing the rabbit in the past.
Yeah, so K66 does the same thing. It goes one way and the other one. First gathering.
Hi, you're listening to another episode of Not Zen. Today's guests are familiar ones. Our first one is Scott.
Hello.
Our second is Daniel.
Hi, I'm...
Our third is Micah.
Sappinin.
And our fourth is Brian.
Hey, it's Brian here, lighting candles ready to go far into the night.
Great. And today's case is case 28 of the Mumonkan. Ryutan blows out the candle. Now, before we jump in, I just want to give a little background on Ryutan. Ryutan lived around 850. He succeeded Tenyo Dogo and was the teacher of Tokusan. As a boy, he used to take rice cakes to Dogo of Tenyu Temple. This led him to become Dogo's disciple. Little is recorded of him except the story in the present case. Now, I think, Brian, you wanted to read this one. Am I correct?
Yeah, I did want to.
Well, I'm ready if everyone else is.
Okay. The case is this. The case is the 28th one in the Mumonkan, which you can Google and find. Pretty easy to find. Even this translation, which is the Sakita version. Very easy to find if you want to follow along. Okay. Ryutan blows out the candle. Tokusan asked Ryutan about Zen far into the night. At last, Ryutan said, "The night is late. Why don't you retire?" Tokusan made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but he was met by darkness. Turning back to Ryutan, he said, "It is dark outside." Ryutan lit a paper candle and handed it to him. Tokusan was about to take it when Ryutan blew it out. At this, all of a sudden, Tokusan went through a deep experience and made bows. Ryutan said, "What sort of realization do you have?" "From now on," said Tokusan, "I will not doubt the words of an old Osho who is renowned everywhere under the sun." The next day, Ryutan ascended the rostrum and said, "I see a fellow among you. His fangs are like the sword tree. His mouth is like a blood bowl. Strike him with a stick, and he won't turn his head to look at you. Someday or other, he will climb the highest of peaks and establish our way there." Tokusan brought his notes on the Diamond Sutra to the front of the hall, pointed to them with a torch, and said, "Even though you have exhausted the abstruse doctrines, it is like placing a hair in a vast space. Even though you have learned all the secrets of the world, it is like a drop of water dripped on the great ocean." And he burned all of his notes. Then, making bows, he took his leave of his teacher. And there ends the case, and Moomin's comments follow after, which I won't read yet. That's a long one. A lot to go through there and make sure we heard.
Easily the longest one we've done. Maybe one of the longest koans there is, frankly. I'm just going to take a guess there.
At least in the Mumonkan.
Okay, well, let's do a quick play-by-play of what happened in this case, right? Because, like we said, it's a long one. So we have a guy, Tokusan. He goes to this guy, Ryutan, who we take as the Zen Master in this case. And Ryutan and him talk late into the night. And then, into the night, Ryutan says, "It's late, you better go back." So Tokusan makes his bows and goes to go outside. He goes outside and he sees it's dark. Very astute, Tokusan is. And so he asks the guy he's been chilling with all night. Well, he doesn't ask him, but he says it's dark outside. And we're talking ancient China. There's beasts out there. Or supposedly. So Ryutan lights a candle. The translation is lantern, and there's a note by Blythe in his translation where that clarifies by lantern it's literally a candle with some paper around it. So Ryutan lights a candle, and he hands it to Tokusan, and then just as Tokusan's about to grab it, Ryutan blows it out. Make a wish, happy birthday. It's his first birthday. Because we know that because at that he was enlightened, right? So that's like kind of the first half of what goes on. Is Tokusan and him are talking. Tokusan goes to leave, but it's dark. And so Ryutan goes to hand him a candle, but just before Tokusan can take the candle, Ryutan blows it out. And and apparently that enlightened Tokusan, or at least Tokusan was enlightened at this happening.
The Gregory Wonderwheel translation, I just want to say this as a note. When you talk about this paper candle, he actually says a paper measuring candle, which I thought was just an interesting specific that was in here in the other translation.
Wonderwheel makes a point to, like, as an artistic exercise in itself, as a translator, create as literal a translation as possible. So I wouldn't be surprised. Like little things like that added in.
I like the what stood out to me, like you said, back in the day when it was night, it was very dark, and I really like the imagery of him turning after a long night of talking about Zen. All he finds is darkness at the night, and then this master gives him a candle for a moment, and then blows it out, and then he's still met with darkness. And I think that's.
Does he give him the candle though? He goes to give him the candle, but he never actually gives it to him. He blows it out before he can give it to him.
I have in the Wonderwheel translation, Tan then lit a paper measuring candle and gave it to him.
And then there's no following sentence that says
Shan intended to accept it, but Tan then blew it out.
Right.
So I think we can take that as like in the Chinese.
It's the same thing.
He held it out.
Yeah. I think they're holding hands over this candle almost.
When it's blown out. Yep.
So are we talking like girl sleepover kind, or are we talking like
I think it's more like first communion.
Awakening Satan kind? Oh, okay. Boy sleepover kind.
Right.
That's interesting. So there is contact made. I was going to say, because the suggestion that's going about is basically that imagery of the hand either, or him not fully giving it to him, or giving it to him and it's blown out right at that moment, is sort of a image of what it's like for a monk to be enlightened by a master.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I don't think because Wonder Wheels is Tan Lent then like Lung Tan, i.e. Ryutan, lit a paper measuring candle and gave it to him. Shan intending to accept it. However, like if he's intending to accept it, then we can just take, because again, Wonder Wheel is translating as literally as possible in Chinese.
Right.
Very, very distinct from the languages that gave birth to ours. I think we can interpret this as Ryutan lit a candle and held it out to him. And then as he went to grab it, poof, make a wish.
And then he's left again going back to the darkness, which I like. I think it reminds me of, there's no saving in Zen, so to speak.
How much easier would like this shitty paper candle would have really made it anyways, the walk back, I wonder.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point. That's a good point, actually.
Yeah. I think the fact that he went to take it, I would interpret it as the kind of candle you would use to walk back.
Okay.
This is one of the cases where I don't think this is poetic. I 100%. I mean, because Lungtan's sitting there. Pardon me, Ryutan. For the listener, in Chinese, same guy. The Chinese name is Lungtan. In Japanese, it's Ryutan. But anyways, Ryutan's sitting there all night. He has plenty of time to brainstorm after getting a read of this guy, right? They're getting to know each other all night. Take that how you will. And so this is one of the cases where I don't think this is poetic speech. I think that it is. I think this was a master move, literally Zen Master move by Lungtan. He was like, this'll because we clearly see that this is a story of a young genius who comes down from the north. Actually, well, we'll get into that later. But anyways, I think that this is a literal scenario.
When you say he didn't mean it poetically, do you mean he didn't consider, say, the monk turning back to darkness, that kind of thing, without the light? It was more in just the action of blowing out the candle in an isolated kind of image.
I mean that I don't think the case itself is speaking metaphorically. So we, in Guishan's finger case, we talked about this idea that the boy getting his finger chopped off is a metaphor for the inner boy in Guishan.
I see.
And I don't think that that's the case in this. I think.
So you don't think the candle could have represented, in a metaphorical sense,
I think it definitely
the teaching that he wanted, and then from the Zen Master.
I think it definitely metaphorically meant things, and that Lungtan and Ryutan intentionally meant it to, imply certain things. But I do think, like, if I was there, I would literally have seen this happen. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
There was a literal paper candle involved in it.
Right. Okay. My mistake.
So while there's the metaphor of intent for sure,
We've dug pretty far into that, right into the middle there. But
Well, I think it's interesting. Dan, you said that he sat there all night with him, and I'm trying to find it. One of the translators says in the commentary that, okay, I'm going to read this really quickly. The sudden darkness which Tokusan experienced is different and yet the same as the nothingness of the sutra which he had studied so long. And so we may answer the previous question and say that anyone can be enlightened by darkness if he studies the Kongo Kyo as desperately as Tokusan did. Anybody can write Paradise Lost if he is willing to go blind in political work. This, of course, is an overstatement, an oversimplification, but so was Tokusan's burning up commentaries on the Kongo Kyo that might have enlightened someone whose spiritual obstacle was intellectual rather than physical.
so in Zen text, night is actually a in this reference. I'm gonna call it as sort of that. But if you look at the Dangshan's 5 ranks, you have reference to night and 3 watches into the night, just before the full moon, is before you're enlightened. Explicitly, almost says that. You have the story of the 6th patriarch and what's his name? Starts with an S. His counterpart, who was competing for the poem, it comments on him, how he spent the night. Other times in the Mumonkan, it talks about, I think it was someone was going to visit Yunmin. They struggled through the night and then went back to Yunmin in the morning. But the night struggle is a thing, and we can both, as Dan said, it's a very great picture because it's very easy to see both literally and metaphorically.
There's a few of those with regard to traveling at night and arriving at noon, and a fair few references to that.
Yeah.
are you talking about Joshu's case
Probably.
where he talks about that? Leaving at night, arriving at noon, donkeys pass, emperors pass at night, but they get through at noon.
That's the main traveling one.
Yeah,
And yeah,
probably.
I'm glad you guys brought up this, because I definitely see this as a case that, among other things, illustrates this traveling by night meme that Zen utilizes.
Tokusan was, as we'll get into it later, but he was definitely an aggressive one who would be one to talk about Zen far into the night, even to the point where
he wrote
Ryutan,
commentaries on the Diamond Sutra,
right?
And he came down south to babble about him.
It seems like the metaphorical content comes in right when he says, when Tokusan says it's dark out there, right when he first steps out of the tent and he says it's dark out there. I feel like that is maybe not I think the references to night are less explicit than that. That is very explicit.
Well, before that, we have Ryutan saying, "Why don't you retire? I mean, what's the weight there?"
Right.
Yeah, why don't you stop with all this?
I see Ryutan is tricking him on this one. I see it doesn't explicitly say, but I see like a 19, 20-year-old Deshan here, Tokusan here. Deshan, for the listener, is Tokusan's name in Chinese. I see a very young 19, 20-year-old Tokusan, and Ryutan baits him to go to leave. And I think that it's dark out here was literally like a boyish comment. Like, not like it was immature, but like I don't think he meant that in the Zen way. And that's the secret of catching him off guard, because so many of these enlightenment stories, integral to them are this catching it off guard.
I will sort of make an alternate to that. I'm wondering, like, when I think of blinds being opened, in my head, this is just what popped in my head automatically, but I think of the oak tree, and I think of Joshu sitting there looking out a window at the oak tree, with of course, the implication being the blinds are up.
I think it'd be useful to talk about the backstory to this, because we've kind of can't help ourselves but reference that thus far. So it would be useful to talk about that so the reader has an idea of this backstory of kind of the personality of this Tokusan and exactly what he was doing there with Ryutan.
With all the sutra stuff, which is referenced in the cone as well.
Did anyone want to read that?
I can read that.
Okay, thanks, Micah.
And this is in Mumonkan's commentary, right?
Right. So this is on page 201, the commentary, Mumonkan's commentary. Before Tokusan passed the barrier of his native place, his mind was eager, his mouth was anxious. With a purpose in his mind, he went south to confute the doctrine of a special transmission outside the sutras. When he got on the road to Reishu, he asked an old woman to let him have something to point his mind. The old woman said, "Your worship, what's all that writing you're carrying?" Tokusan said, "That's the manuscript of my notes and commentary on the Diamond Sutra." The old woman said, "In that sutra it says, dispositions of mind or modes of thought, whether relating to the past, the present, or the future, are alike unreal and illusory. Which of these minds is your worship intending to point?" That question was a poser for Tokusan. Nevertheless, not giving up in despair to the old woman's words, he asked her, "Is there a Zen master near here?" "About 5 li away lives Ryutan," she replied. He arrived at Ryutan's quite deflated. It must be said that the former words and the latter words were inconsistent. Ryutan took pity on him quite shamelessly. Seeing that Tokusan had some fire of knowledge, Ryutan should have violently thrown muddy water over his head. Looking at the whole affair impartially, it was all just a farce.
Now, I read this ahead of time, and this is one of the rare instances where I actually prefer Sakida's translation of this to Blythe's. And so I'm wondering, also because it was long, and so a repetition will be useful, does anybody also want to read Sakida's? And particularly because of these, the lines in the sutra, it says positions of mind or modes of thought, whether relating to past or present of the future, are all unreal and illusory. Which of these minds is your worship intending to point, right? And, Deshan says, "Can you give me a rice cake to help point in mind?" In Sakida, he says, "To refresh my mind," which
it's a little more straightforward.
Exactly. It makes much more sense.
I can read it. If you don't want to hear it again, just push the back 30-second space.
Listen to it again.
Yep, go for it. Here's the comment in Sakida's version. Before Tokusan crossed the barrier from his native place, his mind burned and his mouth uttered bitterness. He went southward. I assume that's a spelling mistake. Southward, intending to stamp out the doctrines of special transmission outside the sutra, which is Zen. I'm sorry.
Basically, he came from the northern school down
Correct.
to the southern school.
Yep, which was his native place. When he reached the road to Reishu, he asked an old woman to let him have lunch to, quote-unquote, refresh his mind. "Your worship, what sort of literature do you carry in your pack?" the old woman asked. "Commentaries on the Diamond Sutra," replied Tokusan. The old woman said, "I hear it is said in that sutra, the past mind cannot be held, the present mind cannot be held, and the future mind cannot be held. Now, I would like to ask you, what mind are you going to have refreshed?" At this question, Tokusan was dumbfounded. However, he did not remain inert under her words, but asked, "Do you know of any good teacher around here?" Brave fellow. The old woman said, 5 miles from here you will find Ryutan Osho. Coming to Ryutan, Tokusan got the worst of it. His former words were inconsistent with his later ones. As for Ryutan, he seemed to have lost all sense of shame in his compassion toward his son. Finding a bit of live coal in the other, enough to start a fire, he hurriedly poured on muddy water to annihilate everything at once. A little cool reflection tells us it was all a farce. Now, Dan, I think we have some
did it
great
say he did or that he should have violently thrown muddy water?
He hurriedly poured on muddy water to annihilate everything at once.
Fascinating. In
That's
life, it
very
says
different.
Ryutan should have violently thrown muddy water, implying that he did not.
I'm gonna side with Sakita here as far as the how it linguistically makes sense with the rest of the passage.
Blythe makes a footnote of on that line of, instead of praising him at the very end of the case when Ryutan goes up to, and this will be more clear to the listeners when we start focusing on the second half of the case, when he goes to them and says, "Behold, Tokusan burns his books." Blythe's note on that, he should have thrown muddy water over his head, is curbed him publicly instead of praising him publicly. And obviously the fire comment is a pseudo pun on the paper lantern and all.
Right. Yeah.
It highlights some of the difficulties translating Chinese. They do tenses differently, plurals differently, pronouns differently, and leave so much up to context when it comes to converting it into English.
Oh, and I have sympathy and awe. I've been doing Duolingo Chinese on and off, and if you add all the ons, maybe like 6 months, and I still can barely say anything. It's hard.
Right, and that's
hard.
why that's why you see us going back and forth between the translations, listeners. That's why we do it. And so we can, it's an art. They do it themselves, so we can compare and contrast and sort of get a picture, see what translators are landing on, see what the outlier is, see if the outliers have any validity.
And what of their own beliefs they bring to the translation.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, which we've seen before, right? Because we've accused Sakita, and I think rightly in certain instances. Now, like I said, in this one, I actually prefer Sakita's. But sometimes we've said, Sakita's translation here is a little prescriptive, a little more shouldy than otherwise. So yeah, it does. Then we have Wonder Wheel translating stuff as literally as possible, and so the case where it's like the monk goes to Nansen and says, "I've just arrived to this monastery," and he says, "I've just arrived to this jungle." One of my favorites. But I do
a lot of translators have really
in.
interesting things to say about their techniques too. Wonder Wheel in particular, I've read a little bit that he's written about translation, about what his goals are, and that's something interesting for listeners too.
So where do we want to reorient in this here?
I want to zoom in on exactly the question that this old woman asked Tokusan, because it can get lost in the larger narrative. Yeah. And why did that stump him, right? So you have so let's break this down like we did for the case, right? You have a cocky young Tokusan who wrote a commentary in the Diamond Sutra. And so for those not familiar, a commentary in the Diamond Sutra, the Mumonkan itself is a commentary on a set of koans from various collections. The Blue Cliff Record is a commentary. So when we're talking commentary, we're talking things like what we're reading. It's not like, a handful of footnotes. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. You know what I'm saying? So Homeboy had a book, and he comes south because he hears about these Southern devils, quote unquote, who are talking about sudden enlightenment. He's like, well, that's not what the Diamond Sutra says. And so this old woman catches him making a slip in his speech that shows that his intuition was off when he says, "Can you give me a rice cake to relax or to refresh my mind?" And she notices the Diamond Sutra and she says, well, it says in the Diamond Sutra that You know, the past mind is illusory, the present mind is illusory, the future mind is illusory. So which of those minds are you fresh? I.e., if all the minds are illusory, according to the test that you're talking about, what are you trying to refresh? Which really makes it hits home of if you take this as true that that all mind is illusory, then what is the you that is saying that you want to refresh that? And I see it, it goes back again to Homer Simpson asking Flanders, could Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he couldn't eat it?
And that was why I read Blythe's commentary about how this could only happen in this way, or somebody could only be enlightened in this way who was so attached that sort of like this was tailored to this guy, to Tokusan, right? That he was so attached to this particular scripture, to this particular study of this particular thing. And when people have something to say about that, he takes it really personally. He gets pretty upset with this lady, and he leaves. He's like, doesn't want to hear what she has to say after she says that, right? Like accuses him of not knowing his text well enough.
Yeah, two things.
Well, he doesn't accuse her. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
He actually says, "Do you know of any good teacher around here?"
Right, he sees. I wanted to say, man, was she fucking witty and on the ball?
Right,
yeah, she just whipped that out.
I wrote down one of the things I wrote down is imagine her face when he went on to ask where the nearest Zen teacher was.
She knew a thing or two.
Wow, right? Like, okay.
But she must have been impressed,
go.
right? Because she might expect him to throw a temper tantrum. Instead, he goes, "Okay, I need to find what's going on down here."
He's just a teacher's pet. Pet.
With your comments on how attached Tokusan was to study, it reminds me of case 5 of the Mumonkan, which is Kyogen's man up in a tree, where basically a student of Buddhism is basically stuck in a tree. I don't know if I should read it, but basically he's hanging from a branch with his teeth, and someone asks him a question, and he's forced to either answer the question and fall to his death, or not answer the question and stay up in the tree. And I love that koan, and there's definitely a similar theme going on here. This super attachment to the intellect, and what happens when you let go.
I was planning on bringing that up when we address the second half of the case. I don't want to segue to that yet, but
yeah, we've got a lot going here just in this case.
Right.
This was my first favorite case, and it almost is my favorite. Spoiler alert: Deshan is my favorite Zen master.
Is that right?
And his whole story is just so wonderful. It has so many of the tropes that I love. I mean, we have Jaime Lannister getting his sword fighting hand cut off. We have pretty much any video game where you start out super powerful, but then suddenly you've lost all your power and you have to have that redemption. We have the Princess and the Pauper. We have God of War, exactly. The fall of the great, and then what do you do when you fall? Now, what does Tokusan do when he falls? He doesn't throw a temper tantrum. He goes, "Where's the nearest master?"
Yeah, he's so serious. It's endearing.
And then we have the trip of the wise woman on the road. We have, and I think that this isn't just necessarily tropes. I don't think that this takes away from the potential validity of the literal history of this. Because drama imitates life, and life imitates drama.
So yeah, we have this guy who's kind of got this zoned in thing. He's talking to ladies about his Zen in his commentaries. He's like, "Where's the closest teacher?" Doesn't stay with her, doesn't stay the night, zooms to him, and then talks to Ryutan far into the night. We can call that literally, or we can call it a dark night of the soul, or whatever.
Probably both. When I was at school, we would have. I went to a very big party school for a couple of years for university, and pretty much every night of the week, people would just show up, and we would just drink and essentially party. And we called it after 3 a.m. We called it real talk, and we got deep into the night of our souls.
I feel like Ikiyu says, "Night after night after night, stay up all night, nothing but your own night." One of his poems.
And another reference to Paradise Lost, which Blythe quoted, that in that book you've got the fall of Satan, and his awesome speech about how it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Yeah, that's the John of the Cross, right? Is another Christian reference here. Right? dark night of the soul.
Hmm.
And then we have the why don't you retire from Tokusan, which almost kind of I want to in a fun way put as Tokusan just being tired, right? It's just like, okay, dude. And that's, which brings back to Dan's point, like, and then also maybe we have Moomin here saying it is all a farce. So like,
Well,
not
I think
only
that is the farce. I think Ryutan set this up.
Not only does Ryutan not get enlightened by getting handed a paper candle, he also sets the whole scene himself. All of it is Ryutan. And Tokusan just kind of is carried along by his energy, to put it a certain way.
I mean, we can imagine that if Tokusan is the kind of guy who writes commentaries and then takes it upon himself to go south to, in a tradition known for dialogue combat, go do this and then, talks in the middle of the night. We know anyone who's been to university has seen in one class that kid in their class, right? Like, we know
This is over a glass of red wine in your friend's dorm talking about, poli-sci at 2 a.m.
No, I'm not
with
talking
some
about
kid
that
who's
guy.
there from-
I'm talking about the guy who takes a shot every 30 minutes and still is babbling. I'm talking that guy.
Barack
I'm
Obama.
talking the guy who's just willing to talk about all the things. So I don't think, and because of that, I don't think it would take very long for Ryutan to kind of gauge up this guy's intuition.
Yeah.
I see
It's all a
Tokusan as
farce.
just going.
As a case, it's all a farce.
And it might seem like it's overinflating the ability of Ryutan, but like, I've met professors who have this kind of ability. Like, there is a certain, when your day in, day out is working with students, you see this. And exactly, they can construct a farce. I've had professors do very similar things. They're amazingly, pedagogy is an amazing art.
Well, I'm sure, like your professors, there are certain types of students, and this Ryutan has probably run into a lot of Tokusans before.
I think we can tie a few things together. Just one quick. There's a little bit of background that we haven't covered yet that I want to chuck in before we get into the second half. But I think linking some things together, the reference to farce is a little bit like the blowing out the candle. The candle was kind of a farce if the darkness is what enlightened him. And I think you can tie that also to what we were talking about originally with the metaphorical nature. I love these cases where the real life is the metaphor. And I think even back to the visit with the old woman, where she kind of makes it clear that he knows about this thing, but he's not experientially living it. So it's kind of those splits tied together.
To address that, I don't know if it was so much the darkness that enlightened him, and like, he knew it but wasn't living it, etc. I think it all comes back to the same concept, so much as, so he thinks he can get it from the Diamond Sutra, which is, the irony there is that it's named the Diamond Sutra because it's so unbreakable. And then an old woman just selling rice cakes breaks it. And he finds that doesn't have the answers he thought it does. And what's the first thing he does? He says, where's the nearest Zen teacher? And he goes to that Zen teacher. And then when that Zen teacher goes to give him something, he blows it out. And I don't know if it's so much like the darkness, so much as Tokusan saw Ryutan, I'm sure giving him a shit-eating grin after this. You can't get it from me. And if I can't get it from the books and I can't get it from you, where can I get it?
Which is kind of a farce.
Right, yeah. I do like what Cherished in Micah said in one of his readings. I think it was a commentary.
He cherishes Micah.
I do.
He's been slipping up like this a lot lately. Sweetheart Micah.
I was about
love
to say,
Micah.
I mean, we're a loving.
My baby Micah. Yeah, it's all time.
Well,
now.
in his commentary, it did say that he was, there was this emphasis on even people can be enlightened by the darkness. Now, I have a couple ideas about this. Is that, you could understand the flame as the slight insight you get from, say, making a whole book of notes on the Diamond Sutra, and then realizing that's nothing and it's blown out and you're left in darkness again. And I'll just leave that sit because that's more or less obvious. But I'm reminded somewhat of Gutai's finger, because there's the methods are totally different, and I'm just going off the cuff here. Something's being taken away in both. One's the finger, the kind of relying on this one teaching, which is I wouldn't call it exactly anti-intellectual, but it's like totally intuitive of a teaching. There's no explanation in the finger, whereas Tokusan's preferred one was super intellectual. And so there's an interesting style of teachings that goes on. Basically, a dependency on the unspoken intuition of the one finger, and then the dependency, I mean, possibly, and then the dependency on, say, super intellectual study of sutras. And so I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was kind of neat.
So that one little extra bit of background while you ponder that thought, from the other translation that's in the real Shobogenzo, the Cleary's Eye of True Teaching, he's got basically the same story of him heading south to fight the heretics of the Southern School. But
just to be clear, like I want you to continue, but I just want to be clear, just so everyone's on board. That is from a different compilation. That doesn't mean that's not.
Yes.
So that's composed by Zen Master Dawi. Pronunciation's hard.
Yeah.
In the
Yes.
Shobogenzo.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to address that.
No worries. And it's labeled as number 490. The labels in that book are a bit odd, but it's volume 2, translated by Cleary, called The Eye of True Teaching, only on Kindle, I think. But as part of the introduction there, he's got, he headed south, and then he says he first went to Longtan, where as soon as he stepped across the threshold, he said, I have long heard of Longtan, and in brackets it's got Dragon Pond, which I think is the meaning of Longtan. I have long heard of Longtan, but now I am here, I don't see a pond, and a dragon does not appear. Longtan said, you have personally arrived at Dragon Pond. Deshan then bowed and withdrew. And I've heard another one where he stepped out from behind a screen, kind of surprised, like, oh, I am here, the dragon. So that's just a little bit more interesting stuff.
In the notes in Sakita, he puts, following her words, the old woman's, Tokusan went to Ryutan, and at the beginning of the interview, he said, Ryutan, and this one, Dragon Abyss, but I like Dragon Pond better. It is well known, but when I am here, I see neither dragon nor pond. Ryutan said, you see Ryutan with your own eyes, which I think is real intense. And then Tokusan was impressed, and talking with Ryutan, he was converted. And I don't see that as converted like religiously, but like, okay, like when a professor earns your respect.
Yeah. And that one is very similar to the Joshu's story of, I forget who it was that came to visit him, but he said, I've heard of the stone bridge of Joshu, and when I get here, I don't see a stone bridge, I just see a wooden one. And Joshu says, you don't see a stone bridge, you just see a wooden one.
Huh? He's not going to put words in your mouth,
That's right.
But there's something in this. You don't see. I don't know. So I've read a lot of these cases, and I don't think I've seen any other person. Now you see it with Deshan over and over and over again in all of his cases. But you don't see one really other than Deshan who exemplifies this trope, and I think that it makes sense because teachers, most students are not going to be the kind of a hyper genius, eccentric polymath that I envision Deshan to be, Tokusan. But every teacher is going to eventually come across one of those, and they are never going to forget them. And they're going to be very excited by them, and so it makes sense that you have that in there. But there aren't very many cases or other Zen masters addressing this trope.
And all
Goodwill Hunting.
in all of Tokusan's appearances, we also have the Zen Master at the end praising them highly and saying, this man is going to continue the way.
Yep.
And Mumon saying Longtan was excessively kind to him.
Couldn't help but be.
They refer to him as the son later on.
Yeah.
He's continually referred to son or some form of son, which is just hard-hitting.
I think
Blythe calls him his spiritual son.
Was Huangbo a little bit like that with Linji? I get the feeling he was.
Huangbo with Linji, I might think of Linji as his rebellious teenage daughter. more than his son.
Yeah.
We'll address that in another episode, which
We'll get to Huangbo. That'll be a whole fun. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
do like a series, like a Huangbo. Like, oh, we have to do Huangbo, but it'll be good. It'll be fun.
We'll just say Linji likes to run into Huangbo's bedroom and bitch to him and then leave. He'll run in and slap him a couple times and run away. But no, so
Did we want to move on to the second half?
yeah.
Yeah, I think a good segue is what you said, Jim, about I forget exactly how you phrased it, but I thought it was really good about how the darkness was what enlightened him.
I preferred that kind of perception. I think the way I might have put it, because I heard it from Cherished, and I liked how he said it, and I think it was from one of the commentaries he's reading, that basically he was enlightened. What was it? Now I can't fucking remember. But maybe Cherished a few of the commentary. But it's like anyone can be enlightened by the darkness.
I can, I would just read that one sentence.
Yeah, I haven't seen that line, and that line is everything my enemy, so I need to find it so I can destroy it.
It's in, I'll tell you exactly where it is. It's in
Mumon doesn't say it, I bet.
Page 200 of Blythe. The sudden darkness which Tokusan experienced is different and yet the same as the nothingness of the sutra which he had studied so long.
That's not saying anyone can enlighten by the darkness.
No, it wasn't that.
And so we may answer the previous question and say the previous question being, can anybody be enlightened by the dark, that experience of darkness that Tokusan experienced when the candle went out. And so we may answer the previous question and say that anyone can be, quote, enlightened, unquote, by darkness if he studies the Kongo Kyo as desperately as Tokusan did.
Right.
Anybody can
okay.
paradise lost.
I remember that, and I know where I want to go with that. Okay, let's do that, actually, because then I can bring up Kingdom Hearts.
Right. Is that good, Scott? Was that close to it?
Yeah, it's close to it, but I think it was your reaction to that was made me go, oh yeah, that's really good.
Oh, damn.
I mean, just yellow. Scott, the floor is yours.
Let's go from there anyway. So I thought it would be a good segue to go to the second half of the koan by looking at what joins those two halves together, which is that moment of the candle being blown out. And I really like the way Jim phrased it earlier, which came from, I think the darkness can be something that enlightens people.
There is something. I'm going to use a reference that very, very few people are going to get, but the ones who do get it are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. And when I see that, you lose all the light. You're in the darkness. Well, actually, really, you see this in all sorts. Galadriel gives Frodo the light to use in the darkness, etc. Except, how much good does that do him? Sam makes it work. But anyways, imagine you didn't need that light. But there is in the final boss fight of Kingdom Hearts 1, Sora starts falling, like the ground goes away and Sora starts falling. And then he hears the memory of Riku in his ear saying, "Come on, Sora, I thought you were better than that." And then upon hearing that of his own memory, he begins to fly. And that is like everything. Like that as an image encapsulates all of the metaphor that I can think of with this. The candle blows out, you're in the darkness, but now you can fly. Like, you're not going to get it from the Diamond Sutra. You're not going to get it from Lungtan. You're not going to get it from studying physics. You're not going to get it from studying philosophy. You're not going to get it from
You're in the darkness and you're falling. And you're falling at the same time.
You're falling,
right?
but you can fly.
That's it.
Right.
I wanted to say that I want to read the last line of the commentary from each of the 4 translations that I have here really quickly. Just the last sentence. Blythe's is, looking at the whole affair impartially, it was all just a farce. Wonder Wheels is, coming to observe the situation coolly, the whole operatic act was a good laugh. Sakita's is, a little cool reflection tells us it was all a farce. And Cleary's is, if we look at their interaction with cold indifference, it was a good laugh. I think everybody reacts differently to situations where, the floor has come out from under you in terms of, anything that can, that can be the loss of your doctrine and your, commitment to your religion, or it can be the death of somebody in your life or something like that, or like you have a serious injury or illness or something
What
like
does Harry
that.
Potter do when Dumbledore dies?
Right,
You
exactly.
lose the last of your protectors, right?
I think it's interesting that the flying comparison that you're making is sort of like where do you find the redemption in all of this, right? In this experience of loss, and the redemption seems to be there, but then also the redemption gets ripped away, and like that's what the darkness is. But at the same time, like he's still left standing there, and he's still there, and the whole operatic act, as Wonder Wheel called it, like keeps going.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the sort of like important thing that you have to take away as like the trade-off, right? Because it almost feels like this.
I was feeling poetic and I
Super
thought of
pessimistic experience of
redemption
loss.
and recovery. Micah, would you say that? And then I had this thought. Would you say that? And actually, really, I guess this is a question to the floor. Redemption is a subset of recovery? Is redemption just a type of recovery? Because I don't know if Tokusan so much redeems himself here so much as recovers. Though actually, I guess we could say a type of redeeming. He kind of does an Odin thing. This is a good segue. If nobody has something they want to jump in on before we go to the second half, but he kind of does an Odin move of sacrificing himself to himself, or maybe what he thought his self was based upon, when he burns his commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And Brian, can you read the second half, just because you read it the first time? Can you read the second half of the case for us after Tokusan was enlightened?
Yes, it is thus. At this, all of a sudden, Tokusan went through a deep experience and made bows. Ryutan said, "What sort of realization do you have?" "From now on," said Tokusan, "I will not doubt the words of an old Osho who is renowned everywhere under the sun." The whole earth, everything. The next day, Ryutan ascended the rostrum and said, "I see a fellow among you. His fangs are like the sword tree. His mouth is like a blood bowl. Strike him with a stick, and he won't turn his head to look at you. Someday or other, he will climb the highest peaks and establish our way there." Tokusan brought his notes on the Diamond Sutra to the front of the hall, pointed at them with a torch, which I think is funny. Sam, it's a funny picture. Yeah, he's just... This is it very much fits our picture we've built of him, of this kind of just vehement, scholar.
Just wait until we get to when he meets Guishan. Yeah.
And even though you have exhausted the abstruse doctrines, it is like placing a hair in a vast space. Even though you have learned all the secrets of the world, it is like a drop of water dripped into the great ocean. And he burned all of his notes. Then, making bows, he took leave of his teacher.
I want to jump in here real quick, just because it's something I feel like we could spend a lot of time on that I can't figure out forever. However, then I read Clear Note, and it removes, I think, a lot of potential confusion. The Blood Bowl thing, I think, is the weirdest thing in there to anyone listening. Like, what does his mouth Blood Bowl mean? But or not clearly, but Blythe puts a note there. This perhaps reminiscent of the red cavernous mouths of, and then in parentheses, the pictures and statues of divas and demons. That I think that helps a lot. That it's because we would expect, Buddhist scholars of this era to be familiar with the fact that divas and demons had red cavernous mouths.
And red is a very happy color in Chinese culture.
Oh.
Bowl has a lot of different connotations and meanings, but it always is, it's always around bowl. So it's always an
Did you say
something
a
that's
round or a round
it's
bowl?
either take whichever. It's
Okay.
so you have Joshu telling people to clean their bowl, and you have a silver bowl being specifically pointed at, and you have monks carrying around their begging bowls, stealing alms from people. But it's always it's always either something that you're offering or receiving, is what goes in or out of your bowl. And then there's an adjective or something put on the bowl, like silver or blood, to give flavor to how it is being received or given.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how it connects, because really the sentence kind of puzzles me. His fangs are like the sword tree, his mouth is like a blood bowl. Strike him with a stick, and he won't turn his head to look at you. And, we just described a pretty intimidating looking creature. And I thought it was interesting that he doesn't turn his head to look at you. That's also sort of the Zen meme that gets played out, is the not looking back. But I don't know exactly how it connects with the fangs or the blood bowl.
The sword tree reminds me of that other one where the commentary says you have to climb a mountain of swords.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like Blood Bowl is him offering nothing but his blood.
Oh, okay.
Like red covers the earth, as I said in my poem. The wound is everything, right? Not to get too far into Zen speak outside of the koan, but I'm actually pacing now.
Because it's right before the Blood Bowl, I think it's useful to draw fangs like a sword tree, because it says, again, to the listener, if you're not reading along, among you there's a chap whose fangs are like a sword tree, his mouth a blood bowl. And Cleary, being the good scholar he is, doesn't tell us explicitly. He says, see case 17, the verse, right? Go look it up. So if we go look that up, it's from Mumonkan case 3, Etu's 3 calls, which is a different case, and I'm not going to go into it because Blythe himself calls it a failure on Mumon's part, including the case. But the verse is, he must carry a holus iron kange, and his descendants too can have no peace or rest. I'm just saying that to be intellectually honest, but forget those 2 lines. Here's the 2 lines that matter for this. If you wish to support your religion and cause it to flourish, you must first climb a mountain of swords with bare feet. And so what does he say? He says that among you there's a chap whose fangs are like a sword tree. And Blythe says this is related to this other reference. They're probably both referencing a similar... that's why I call them Zen memes. You see them repeat. His mouth was a sword tree, right? Because what was Deshan's special ability, or Tokusan's special ability? It was his mouth. His words.
My initial reaction is that, this is reference to sort of the potential pitfalls of words, and that words are dangerous or something like that, some kind of hazardous equation of words and dangerous items like swords. But then a part of me that knows better thinks back to, I think, the last recording that I was here for, where we talked about getting everybody involved being run through with what is the quote, Dan?
It says, Gutai, Tenru, and yourself are skewered with are plunged with the same skewer.
And it's interesting that in the case, it wasn't actually Long Tan's words that enlightened him. It was blowing out, like it wasn't a spoken thing. And then he turns around and says, "I'll never doubt your words." It's an interesting link.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm able to put it as the picture, listeners, I have a picture of a candle where the flame is next to the wick. It's in the midst of being blown out. Put that on the podcast. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Brian.
Actually, Scott, I would like to interrupt you. Passing it on. Let me find it quick. I'll just blame Dan and say that he really messed me up, but I lost my stuff.
Version of the interrupt. While he's doing that, I'll say, notice Mumon says, though, you must climb a mountain of swords with bare feet. So, Zen's a school of no doctrine, so we're not going to go saying words are bad, even though a lot of anti-intellectuals disguised as Buddhists would like to say that. It's saying you got to be able to deal with the words, because sometimes the words are, they're tools like anything else. Sometimes the words are going to be hard to come across, like Dongshan said. If you're going to be a man of enlightenment, first you must be capable of a bit of conversation.
Right, that's straight in the verse too.
Sorry, go ahead.
The Mumon's verse: hearing the name cannot surpass seeing the face. Seeing the face cannot surpass seeing the name. Hearing the name. So we have sorcery and then blood bowl. We have brashness, and then blood bowl. To go back, so go ahead.
I just want to say that in Cleary's translation, he actually is even more generous. He says, he throws a couple extra lines saying, when seeking out an enlightened teacher, hearing the name is not as good as seeing the face. From the viewpoint of the false expectations of the teacher that the student brings, seeing the face does not match hearing of the repute.
Oh, this cheater, now I get so much of the frustration. They're like, grandmother.
I saw it and I was like, wow.
I was like, the whole point I was about to say was like, some kind of esoteric way of hinting that the face and the name in the second line are different than the face and the name in the first one. Rather than hearing the name, seeing the face is better. The name of what, the face of what. Rather than seeing the face, hearing the name is better. So rather than hearing the name of Lungtan or Tokusan, seeing the true face of Tokusan when you are Tokusan is better. Rather than seeing the face of Tokusan, looking in the mirror, brushing your teeth, hearing the name, truly hearing the name is better. And Cleary goes and gives it away and this is actually this isn't Thomas Cleary, this is his brother. But they both work together on Book of Record. But, of course, these grandmothers.
Before Tokusan crossed the barrier from his native place, it says.
That I agree with where I think you're going. 100%.
Same.
Okay.
That was the first note I made.
And then Tokusan, back to where I was interrupting. I just want to keep the meta interrupt. So I'll sustain this. I will not doubt the words of an old Osho who is renowned everywhere under the sun. I don't think he was talking about Ryutan there.
Good point.
Who do you think he was talking to?
Me. From you.
Oh, right.
Wait, which line?
I will not doubt the words of an old Osho who is renowned everywhere under the sun.
Well, yeah.
Everywhere under the sun is a Zen meme,
he
right?
says, this is referencing, he translates it as, let me find it. From now on, I will not doubt what you have said. And then the footnote for that, I have not doubt what you is, Blythe says, or all Zen masters, in quotes. Tokusan means he will not doubt the fact of enlightenment.
He will not doubt himself or there's the will you doubt yourself in there as well.
Foreshadowing to the eventual case. Zuigan not doubting himself. Zuigan saying to himself every morning, do not be deceived by others.
I also think that it's possible that you can talk about your own, Brian, when you say he's talking to you, it's possible that you can hold a teacher in great renown. And it's possible that after this experience, you might hold this teacher in great renown. I mean, they give this story, is it in the what does he call it? Dramatis personae in Blythe's translation, where he talks about, Ryutan, when he was a boy, having this teacher that he liked and unclear why, but they just had this, something. They had like some kind of connection, and I think it's, it could be that he is actually talking to him, and it could be that this is like a sentimental moment for them in that way, right? That it is actually like them sharing a real. It could be that he's saying, I'm not going to doubt your teaching anymore because I know that you're being honest, or I know that
he's felt
what
it
you've been
himself.
saying is true now because of this.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, though, that comes with some complexes because he didn't get the teaching from Longtan. However, the fact that he didn't get the teaching from Longtan, you could definitely argue, and I would be willing to go with it, is itself a teaching, quote unquote, from Longtan.
He got the non-teaching
Right.
from Longtan.
I think Moomin calling this a farce kind of sets that up for failure, that
Right.
interpretation.
In what sense?
In that Ryutan didn't really do much. He was just the way he act. I mean, he was a Zen master. He didn't take an action to enlighten this guy, and Ryutan knows it.
We have to remember what a farce doesn't mean a bunch of errors. A farce is like Moliere wrote farces.
Right, exactly.
A farce
So this is like
a piece of literature that is intended for irony, that is intended for specifically what's the actual technical term? Where we the readers know something that the characters do not.
split narrative is
There's a
split screen.
I think it's literally just called dramatic irony. But anyways, a farce is orchestrated. A farce is intentional. A farce isn't just people messing around.
Wonder Wheel calls it an operatic act.
Yeah, exactly.
fourth wall.
I definitely see this as an orchestration.
And can't you? I mean, I, as a classical musician, have been in many an orchestra, and I have many times felt a deep connection with the people that I've played with in that setting. It doesn't mean that I idolize them, but it does mean that, for example, maybe a show of Tokusan's doubt that he did have before this moment in legitimacy was this moment that he talks to this woman who speaks back a line to him of his own studied text, and he doubts that line. Clearly he must, otherwise he would have been enlightened right there, right? And so, like, maybe there are multiple instances here where we're watching somebody doubt this thing that is undoubtable. And
wait, what is
I think
the
it could
second
be a larger
instance?
statement, but I think it's also
I don't mean to cut you off, but I feel like I need to know that to follow the rest of what you have to say.
him going to Ryutan to dispute his doctrine.
Well, that's the first doubt, right?
And then or whatever order, the presented order in
The old woman.
I just mean like what's the second? So I see
the
one.
woman.
I only see one doubt in
the woman. I'm talking about the woman.
The woman definitely
when
instills a
he-
doubt.
he's saying the woman doubt is implied in there.
is implied in where.
Just that the fact that she speaks back a line of his text that he must doubt it in order for him to not be enlightened in that moment, right? Like that's the only thing that stands between him and
That he doubts it? Because I see the doubt is what leads to his enlightenment. And as Mumon says in the
sure.
first case, the Mumonkan, in his commentary, it starts with the great doubt. You must instill great doubt.
Yeah,
You
it's-
got to have that floor fall out from under you.
the doubt is right, exactly. But I'm saying I think when he talks to the woman, that is them showing that the doubt is there, and the doubt is a necessary narrative precursor to him having that doubt ripped away.
Yeah, it's not a value statement. It's just kind of pointing out the series of doubts that are potentially within the koan.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm trying to more robustly grok what you're saying. But what is the second doubt? Not necessarily in terms of order, but I only
Well, I
Get
I
a
think
single
I
doubt
see what you're
in
saying.
the story.
There might be only a single doubt, right? That
There's a single doubt. I'm just saying that there's two instances of them talking about
Oh,
it. in
okay.
the-
Okay,
in
no,
the case.
nope. I get it. I get everything you're saying.
Yeah.
For the second half, I did want to bring something up. Basically, we have this almost outlandish Tokusan with the Diamond Sutra and with the torch, and basically saying you can study this all you want, you're never going to get it. And the imagery with fire is interesting. It reminded me of a possibly unrelated koan that I don't all the way understand.
None
but
of them are
it's-
unrelated.
Okay, let's hope. The imagery is certainly there in the recorded sayings of Joshu, translated by James Green. 170, a monk asked, "What is like a man trying to save his head that is on fire?" The master said, "Study." The monk said, "Where?" the master said, "Don't stand in someone else's place." Now, I'm not sure it directly relates in the way I wanted to, but I like the imagery of, what is like a man trying to save his head that is on fire, and the master said, "Study," and that reminds me, and it's not clear how the monk takes it, whether he takes it the right way, so to speak, but when someone Tokusan, for example, it's as if his head's on fire, and there's this great important task that needs to be done, and then we also have the imagery in the commentary that's like finding a bit of live coal in the other, enough to start a fire. He hurriedly poured on muddy water to annihilate everything at once.
Right, which also I want to point to that as kind of the candle being an impromptu, quick thing. The rest of it not set up.
I think pointing at his sutures with the torch in Cleary's Shobogenzo, there's he says he passed him a torch, not a candle. And I think in some ways it's like he's saying it was a crutch. Yeah, that the Zen master handing him the candle to walk out in the dark, something for him to rely on, like he did with the sutras as a crutch to get him through life, and not having that there, doing it himself, flying. I think there's a link there with him burning the sutras.
Yeah,
I also think that the metaphor of the hair in space. I think, we often hear in Zen about the wordlessness of the teaching, or the teaching beyond scripture, beyond words. A few Zen masters I've heard mention that they could go on and on and on talking forever. The Dharma that's preached is infinite. And so you get things like he has a beard, he has no beard. The opposites, you would have to say everything and its opposite.
What they teach you at Harvard Business School and what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School.
Yeah. And so I think he's saying like a hair in space. It's like whatever you write down in sutras, whatever you can say, it's just a fraction.
And not even just a fraction, it's one over infinity.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's important that we don't interpret this as anti-intellectual, because it's not.
No.
And Tokusan definitely doesn't. I think he's burning it because they were his commentary.
Right.
Because he decided that he was too reliant on them.
Yeah, I think it's very specific. But I wanted to say with the hair in space kind of idea, it certainly brings to mind the darkness from the beginning of the koan. Him facing this big darkness with this one, maybe torch or candle. Yeah.
You have your lightsaber, but then suddenly, like Wile E. Coyote style, you look down and find out,
I'm falling.
The second, somebody, I forget, I think it was Brian, mentioned the impromptu-ness of the impromptuity. Listeners, by the way, we don't only come up with new pronunciations for Eastern names, we also come up with new words. But that second half, I think Mumon is directly saying that's exactly what happened of the verse. So we address rather than hearing the name, seeing the face is better. Rather than seeing the face, hearing the name is better. And the second two lines are, but however much you help the nostrils, look at what you've done to the eyes. And so for the listeners and, whoever else is interested, the nostrils thing is a meme in Zen. When it comes from this idea that if you want to follow an ox around, you follow an ox around. But if you want to lead an ox to look at something, you grab the ox by the nostrils and you grab him and you have him look at the thing, right? So a lot of times they'll say ground, like a lot of times when there's a case where you see a Zen master suddenly jump, Wanbu or Wansong or Mumon will be like, he's after his nostrils, which is a way of saying, he thinks that this is a moment that can induce enlightenment, or if we even will allow that, or this is a moment that after which enlightenment may occur, if I have to be as technical as possible. But anyways, so Mumon's saying, however much you help the nostrils, however much you're after that enlightenment, look what you've done to the eyes. And so you don't want to, in the pursuit of trying to enlighten them, make you think that the enlightenment's coming from somewhere else, or it's not going to be enlightenment. And so I think that references the genius of how Long Tang Ryutan does this. Again, same person. He literally says, "You can't get it from me." I have a guy that I basically call my Zen professor, and I was waiting for a good opportunity to ask him kind of a meta question, and the time arose where I could do it poetically, and so I said, "Can I have some of your tea?" And he said, "I'm afraid you'll find it just out of your reach, but we can clink teacups together." And I see this, and this occurred years later after me really getting into this case. And now looking back, I see that as very analogous to, "I'm afraid, Tokusan, you'll find my torch just out of your reach." But what can
Right.
Tokusan do? And with that being the case, he can fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, side note to the impromptu, whether or not it was planned or not, which I think there was some discrepancy about. I would think if you ran into a student like Tokusan, that you would have to engage with him and almost exhaust him or yourself to some extent before you could say really grab him by the nostrils and
Well, yeah, let's not
show
forget
him what.
Ryutan also stayed up all night.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning that Tokusan or Ryutan asked Tokusan to retire. Right? It's like,
Yeah,
let's be done.
Tokusans don't show up every day. And now intelligence has nothing to do with one's ability to be enlightened. There is no amount of intelligence that is required for you to be yourself, right? But there's definitely a certain amount of explosion of energy, at least, that Tokusan showed up with.
Right, and you would need to
Ryutan saw
engage with that.
And can we acknowledge, Tokusan went from thinking he had to going it like with no hesitation. He knew he was beat. And I don't even know if we can say he was beat. He knew the old woman got him, and he immediately was just reoriented himself and went, "Okay, let's find a Zen master."
Yeah.
Well, the Wonder
he got enlightened in
Wheel
one
translation
night.
says, the first line of the Wonder Wheel translation says, "Because Deshan asked more and more, and night arrived, Tan said, 'The night is deep, sir. Why don't you go lie down?'" And I think he specifically says he asked more and more.
Yeah.
And so I'm imagining this is like, it's not even exhaustion, right? I'm imagining this kid is getting hyped. He's literally like starting to roll. And I'm imagining like one of those trippy videos I've watched on YouTube where like, it's like some cosmic explosion or something, or implosion, where it's like things are like building up to this really big event. And then this like one, little, you just go right over this like action potential like edge, and you like implodes right into nothing. Like it just stops. It's like you expect this explosion, but there's not one, and like
that's where
that's what I'm imagining is going on for this kid when this candle goes out. He's like his whole, his heart is racing, like he's hyped. He's like, "Fuck you, dude, like why are you trying to go to sleep? Like you're an old man, like fuck you, we'll resume this in the morning, like trust me." And he's like about to walk out, and this guy does this, and it's just like black, like you think it's dark out there, watch.
And I think that's where the question of is it a metaphor, is it not a metaphor, I think can be a massive trigger that way, where he's like, "It's dark out, why don't you rest?" When it clicks with him that it's metaphorical and literal at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the brilliance about a lot of koans.
I was just saying to Dan earlier that anything is interesting if you analyze it enough, anything that you read. And I think that's true. I think that a lot of the stuff that we find in here is obviously intentional, even the poetic stuff and the metaphorical stuff. But yeah, it's incredible how many different ways you can come at it. And yet, what do we have to show?
Right. And I don't think the irony escapes any of us. I don't know if I'd say irony about studying this text, which is all about
burning.
Which is all about the futility of studying text.
Well,
but
it's not.
Then again, here we are.
It's
not saying that specifically.
Quote unquote said to me, "I don't believe in logic. I use logic." Right. So there's a difference between identifying with something, putting all your eggs in that basket, and it being another tool in your utility belt. I'm playing Breath of the Wild, to be hit with the kids, right? And I'm a little late to the game on that, but my weapons break. And so I'll find a really cool weapon, it'll be great, but then it breaks. But like it's whatever. That's how it works, Versus if you had a weapon the whole game and then suddenly you lose it, you're like, Mom, Dad, I lost my But we can also notice like in you said it was Wonder Wheel, or actually no, you said it was Cleary, I think, Micah. Tokusan asked him questions through the night. And the best students, I mean best here in terms of like literal skill at being a student, ask questions. And when you're teaching, that's the best thing to get, because even if you don't want to answer their questions, when you get their questions, not like you're not in the mood for it, but when they ask you a question and you're like the best move here isn't to answer, you can then maneuver in such a way, you can shoot it back at them or XYZ. It's an exposure of intuition or intuition gaps. And a student, there's also a skill in being able to formulate the smart questions and the right questions to ask to kind of like zoom in. It's like a search algorithm if anybody's into.
Isn't there a Zen master who answered that question? What is Zen with the answer? It's a question and an answer. Might have been Joshua.
I haven't heard of that, but if anybody said it, something like that, I would definitely. And we do know Zen masters ask questions. They call Dongshan the monk or the master who
people to death.
Monks to death. Yeah.
If we can just think about the Zen texts themselves that we read in a meta sense. So we have this sort of ironic situation where we read these texts and the Zen masters talk about reading texts, the benefits and often the drawbacks of being attached to them and trying to find something in them. And so we have these narratives and these stories in our heads of the Zen masters, which address the narratives and the stories themselves. So, and they disappear, right? They fall in on themselves, or potentially do.
Where do they fall? Where do all these snowflakes fall? That's a reference for maybe a future.
Yeah, one soon maybe.
Yeah, Layman Ping.
Layman Ping is he's a great guy, but he might be a little down the road. So he's such a jokester that we might need our listeners and ourselves to be a little bit more caught up on all the memes.
Yeah, I agree. So do we want to settle up here? Is everyone ready? Is any last thoughts or?
I mean, I think, again, we're never going to. Well, I guess I didn't before, but we're never going to finish talking about these cases, and neither do Zen. What is Mumon? What has Mumon done but taken cases that other people have commented on? He's doing his own comment. And if you look at stuff later, it'll literally have a stack of comments. So-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this upon their comment of their comment of their comment. And so these are things that are endlessly interesting. And Zen is, a lot of these are really just a bunch of Zen masters gossiping to each other. But that's part of the beauty. We'll always have more we want to say. And, we can just be open to it. We never have to close the door.
We can blow out the candle of this podcast and leave the listeners to go read it themselves.
Light your own damn candle.
All right, very cool. Thanks for listening to another episode of Not Zen. Today, I'll let them say goodbye, but this was Jim, and yeah.
Well, before we go, I do want to say, as more of a meta, now that we are out there, publicly accessible, if you are interested in us, we mentioned possibly doing a Layman Pang saying in the future. If you have any case where you're like, this is my case, this is my, bread and butter, and you really are interested in us kind of doing our sports commentating on it, feel free to leave a review in whatever podcast platform you use, and we'll definitely see it, and we'll be definitely interested in discussing what people are interested in.
Great. I agree. Great comment.
All right, so this is Brian offering you my Starry Night Bowl.
This is Jim with empty pages.
Sitting atop a mountain, seeing the world. This is Dan.
And Scott signing off. See you next time.
This is Micah. I love you.
I love you too, Micah.
But I was feeding a kangaroo at one of these. There's lots of places around here where you can go to animal sanctuaries where they run around, they give you food, and you can hand feed the kangaroos. And I was feeding one that was a little shorter than me, sort of 6 inches shorter than me.
Damn.
And I was trying to feed it an apple, and it kind of wanted the apple, and it was coming closer, and I was kind of trying to give it a pat on the head, and it kept leaning its head back away from my hand, but still coming closer to me. So I was a little bit confused, and I was kind of patting it, and then it started to put its hands on my shoulders and go for my face, and I leaned my head back, and I'm still holding this apple, and I'm still trying to pat it, and it had a. And what they do when they fight each other is they kind of go to scratch each other's face, and then they lean back on their tail, and they use their big, those legs. They can jump like 2 meters high. They're strong legs, and they've got big claws on their end. So what they do is they lean back on their tail, and they try to kind of kick each other in the guts and scratch their stomachs out. So I was kind of wrestling, doing the hand motions of the kind of the thing they do when they fight each other, and I didn't realize it. And then this kangaroo just leant back on its tail and tapped me on the stomach, like flat. Both feet just went tap on my stomach. And I just went, oh, that could have hurt a lot if this kangaroo was serious.
Yeah.
So I gave it the apple and I left.
The image, was the apple whole?